And so excited to find another practice geek.
Yeah, it's funny because I just assumed that everybody at the professional level was, and then
Mm.
I found out that that's, I don't know, not necessarily the case. Like there are some people who are amazing players who don't, they're not really that efficient with their practicing. They're just things worked out. They've done enough to do what they need to do, and they have good facility, but they haven't had to really break it down or dissect it. Haven't had to, really kind of drill down on some things. It's interesting to see that.
What a treat. Jason Sulliman is a very special figure in modern brass pedagogy. He's harnessing the power of science to help people make music better and practice more masterfully. In this episode, we're going to go into his practice paradigm and as well talk about facial stability training. I personally started implementing some of his ideas after the episode and almost immediately started solving some nagging issues in my technique. Super cool. His dedication, his systematic approach, it's going to inspire you. So enjoy this episode. It's brought to you by High Range Magic. You can always go to highrangemagic.com if you want to watch my masterclass on unlocking the high range for French horn. But after you listen, check out the mini episode where Jason breaks down a practical example of forward, backward, and goal macro chaining, coaching me personally on a passage I was struggling with. Welcome to the Holistic Horn Podcast. I'm Mars Gelfo. If you like this episode, show some love, hit the like and subscribe button, or leave a comment. Welcome to the Holistic Horn Podcast, Jason Sulliman.
Thanks for having me, Mars. Appreciate it.
When I saw facial stability training, that's not how I heard about you. I'll talk about how I heard about you in a second. But when I saw facial stability training and I looked at your website, I thought, oh my God, here is someone that is really innovating in the brass world. And I need to know what they're doing, what they're thinking. So tell me a little bit about what is facial stability training and how you got into that.
I'll start with what facial stability training is, and then I'll kind of circle back to how I got into it. So if you think about playing a wind instrument, to some extent, there's wind that comes in the body and there's wind that goes out the body, and then we need to control that wind in some kind of way, right? For brass players, there's some kind of embouchure that forms, and for woodwind players, some kind of embouchure is formed. Obviously, the mechanism of vibration is a little different. But starting the conversation for brass players, we breathe in, we breathe out, the lips kind of come to close together, and we basically hold things in some kind of mouth shape so that when the vibration happens, there's a certain sound that we achieve, right? So we're using the muscles in our facial area to control kind of the breath out, which, goes into vibration.
Huh.
The muscles are essentially working isometrically, meaning that they're engaged, but they're not really changing length, right? They're theoretically just holding a shape. And when muscles work isometrically, or I should say when muscles work at all, they basically need three things to do their job. Number one, they need to be strong enough to do the job that you're basically asking them to do. Number two, they need to have enough endurance to do that job. And that's just strength over time. That's just, can they maintain that strength over the time that they need to? And then the third thing is that we have so many muscles and they work in these complex coordinative structures. They need to be coordinated in the right way. How much of this muscle, how much of that muscle is part of doing whatever the thing is. So if you think about throwing a baseball, there's all sorts of muscles in the arm and the shoulder and even the trunk area that all coordinate and work kind of in concert, in harmony, to have the arm have a fluid motion to throw the ball. The muscles in our face do essentially the same thing. So you may have some people who have muscles that are strong enough and they have enough endurance, but the way that the muscles are coordinated isn't exactly right to get the sound that is typically the sound that's being hired in the industry, or it's not the sound that they typically want. That's kind of one scenario. Another scenario might be you have people who maybe they have reasonable levels of coordination, but they just don't have a lot of strength, and so they have a good sound, and they have some good facility in a very small range. And anytime they try to go to extreme ranges or extreme dynamics, they basically fold or buckle depending upon how you're thinking about it. And for those people, it's more of a strength issue. And then maybe there's a third category where you have some people who have enough in strength and the coordination is reasonable, but they have no endurance, and so they can't do that thing, that that extreme stuff for very long. And I think
Huh.
that there are some players that they can. Let's say they could, if we're talking about high playing or high note playing for brass instruments, maybe they can play those notes, but only for like a minute or two, and then they just can't after that.
Okay, so this, oh boy, how many hours do you have?
I know,
Um,
right?
the As someone who specializes in high range for
Sure.
French horn players, I'm often working from the premise that if you don't have endurance in the high range, it's not because your coordination and use is correct and you just don't have endurance, right? You're saying there's a case in which your coordination and use are correct, but you simply don't have the endurance?
Well, I'm saying it's theoretically possible. I don't see it very often.
Okay, cool,
I
cool.
think for me, from what I see, 90% or maybe even more is strength-based issues. There's people that the muscles that need to be strong aren't
Yeah.
strong enough to do the job, and therefore other muscles have most likely been recruited, and so the coordination patterns might be weird. For example, if your jaw retracts a lot, because our masseter muscles are super strong just from all the yawning and chewing and eating we do. So if other little muscles in the front aren't strong enough to hold things in place, that masseter is gonna crank the jaw back, and then you get real downstream to the playing, and to the point where it might actually strangle the lip vibration, because you literally, like, if these are your lips from a side profile, if that bottom lip gets curled under,
Yep.
and it actually just gets strangled to the point where it can't vibrate anymore.
I
You could
call that
say
the
that
bird
that's
beak.
Yeah, you could say
Yeah.
that that's a coordination issue because the muscle coordination is wrong. But really, the muscle coordination issue exists because there is a strength issue with certain muscles. For example, a lot of people, the buccinator muscle on the side is just weak because that's not a muscle that typically will get trained with normal human activity. It may or may not get trained depending upon the way that you practice and what happens during your formative training. For some people, it's fine, and for other people, early on it doesn't get engaged in the way it needs to, and then other muscles get stronger while the buccinator continues to not be part of the equation, and then those coordination patterns get really distorted over time.
How do you know that it's coordination versus strength? Like, if I'm coming at you and I say, prove it to me that it's actually a strength issue versus a coordination, do you measure strength output in some sort of way?
I mean, not to sound callous, but in some ways I don't care. In some ways all three of the parts of the system need to be functioning optimally, and if they are, you'll get the results you want. And if there's something wrong, I basically just think about it along the lines of a spectrum of pathology. So if you imagine somewhere on this side, you have people where things seem to be working well. Like they practice and then they get better. And as they try to level up in their careers, go to grad school, taking auditions, whatever, things just seem to be working on a normal trajectory. Good. There's a high likelihood of very little pathology going on in that scenario. The other scenario is when the amount of practicing you're doing or whatever doesn't seem to be congruent with your trajectory of improvement. You're putting in a lot of effort, you don't seem to be yielding the results. Something's probably going on.
The
To
brick
me,
wall effect.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think it matters per se if it's a strength issue or a coordination issue, because at some level they're both going to enter the chat, and they're just so inextricably linked. It's very unlikely that they're so mutually exclusive that it's even worth getting into the weeds about it. I think the easiest way to describe it is there's three legs to the table. If one of the legs isn't up to snuff, you're going to have issues. And I think the other thing that is important to note is that you're really only going to notice that you have issues if you're trying to level up your play. Like if you're in the bottom level university ensemble at your university, and let's say you're playing, second horn in the concert band at Bowling Ball State University, and you're fine with that, then there's no problem. Like everything's fine. But if all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I really want to go, I want to go for that, principal horn and orchestra seat. And now all of a sudden you're going to be compared to other people that can do certain things on the instrument, and you're going to have to play at a certain level to be competitive in that, range of playing. Now, all of a sudden, we might start noticing, when you go into the high range, your sound gets a little pinched. Your tongue starts getting a little heavy-handed because the mouth shape changes and it doesn't have enough room to work. So it just sounds real clunky and thuddy. But it's because things are collapsing around it. We may not notice that unless you want to level up your playing. So I often find that the people that I work with and the people that find me are people that are trying to level up, whether it's undergraduates and they're gunning for grad school, Or there are graduate students that, yeah, like they're not advancing, they're not doing well in solo competitions, they're wondering why. They seem to be working harder than all the people around them in the practice rooms, and so they're wondering why they don't see the same results. Though, or somebody's been studying with somebody for a while, and again, I don't mean to sound harsh, but if you're studying with somebody who's never had to deal with this on a personal level and never had to really go after learning about it on a professional or teaching level, and you're studying with somebody in that capacity, they might say, hey, there's something going on. You're going to have to find a specialist for this. Google searching, range, embouchure, or whatever, and then finding my page and then saying, hey, my child does this, does that, is that something that you might be able to help them with? Or students themselves, or sometimes there might be, older statesmen who have been playing at a certain level for a while, but as the body ages, we tend to lose strength, we tend to lose endurance, and that might start affecting the way that they're used to playing. So if if your mind's writing checks that your body can't cash anymore, that might be another
Yeah.
to seek out,
Yeah.
specialists, help.
That makes a lot of sense. I imagine that probably anybody would benefit from at least auditing their coordination and strength. And it sounds like you have some workouts and things we're going to get into a little bit later on in the
Yeah.
podcast. But right now, I'm really curious if you can give an example of, say, one of the more meaningful or profound transformations that you've seen through the work. How long did it take? Where was the subject at when they started, and where were they when they finished?
I don't mind naming names because this person has named names on their own podcast. So it's,
Okay.
but Dr. Brian Appleby Weinberg, who's the head of brass and the trumpet professor at Rowan University, he also plays principal cornet in the Atlantic Brass Band. He ran into a situation where he had been playing for years, successful career, doing all the things, and then he got into a really bad bicycle accident. There was a stick that ended up getting caught up in the spokes. He flipped over. His teeth went through the lip. He ended up getting stitches, and he was far enough along in his career where there was a thought in his mind where he just might not play again. He didn't know. But he and I were already good friends, and he was a big fan of some of the other stuff that the fast practicing and some of the other stuff I do. He had kind of stalked me on YouTube, and we had developed a friendship over the years. And so he sent me a picture, and it was just a picture of his face, like all bloody, like he was in the car on the way to the hospital. And I wrote him back a message just saying, "Hey, don't worry about it. You're not going to touch a horn for like 6 weeks, and then we'll build you back. Like, it'll be fine." So I think the first part of the answer is that being in a situation where I could look at somebody whose face was literally messed up, and just know in my heart, "Oh yeah, we can fix that. That's not a problem." Much like if a surgeon sees somebody come in on the table who's just mangled from an accident, and they say, "Oh no, we'll be able to repair that. That's going to be this. That's going to be that." Because sometimes when you're in that situation, it can be quite scary if you don't know if you're going to be able to play again. So it was good to be able to say, "It'll be fine. I'll see you in 6 weeks." And then we started from the beginning. He hadn't played, I think it was, he wanted to the doctor said take 4 weeks off. And so I said, throw 2 more weeks on the pile, hang out with your wife and kids, watch TV, like just do other things. Because the worst thing you can do coming back from injury is try to do too much too soon.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
it's better to wait just whatever you think you're going to wait, just wait 2 more weeks. Because it ultimately is not going to harm you in any way, and if anything, it's going to prevent you from doing damage while you're rehabilitating. So we did that, and then we started from the beginning with very basic. I mean, he was playing 1 minute 4 times a day, so he would play for 1 minute and then rest for like 3 hours, and then pick up his horn and play for another minute and do that.
Was he doing anything else away from the horn to help stuff come into coordination or wellness?
Nope. Just maybe,
Interesting.
I mean, eating and chewing, I guess, or, yawning and talking. But for the most part,
Interesting.
we just started right from the beginning. And so we said, okay, here's your 1 minute exercise. Do that 4 times a day. Spread it out as much as you can. And we did that for like a week or two. And then there was a point where I asked him for certain levels of feedback on how it was going. And when his feedback kind of crossed a certain threshold, that's when we were like ready for chapter 2. And so then at that point, I took him into what I would consider to be a more traditional form of my stability training method. And we just started at the beginning. And then it's tough to say how long it took, because one of the things that I have kind of discovered with the method that I use is that it's so specific and it's so measured, you don't really run into any plateaus. You just keep slowly improving. And so he's still doing stability training, and it's been a couple of years at this point. I would say it probably took somewhere between 6 months and a year for him to get back to a level of play that he was used to. But
Got it.
since then, he's actually playing far better now than he was even back
Interesting.
then.
Just the essence of somebody who, not necessarily an injured player, but someone who is just kind of hitting that brick wall. Have you worked with someone in that situation where all of a sudden, whoa, that's a cool effect, where you helped them to redirect and get around that brick wall? And how long did that take to get them
Yeah,
on track?
I've got a couple of clients. There was actually a 72-year-old iron worker out in like Tucson, Arizona. Was He reached out to me, saw me on the found the website and all that, and recreational player, has a job, in like I'm not even 100% sure what he does, but I know it involves like iron and metal. But he just played in a community band and was starting to kind of get back into it. And there were some other things in his life that had been, not great. So he was kind of trying to lean back into playing like he did when he was younger. Went to Berkeley like 40, 50 years ago or something like that. Somebody who was basically playing okay, but then we just started going through the method, and he was very dutiful with his workouts, and so was seeing the results. And that is kind of a common theme, as you can imagine. It's similar to going to the gym. If you go regularly and do the things, the results are going to work faster. A couple of months later, he's like, wow, things are going really great. The first trombonist wasn't able to make it for this concert, so they asked me if I would step up, and I didn't think I was ready, but I did it, and it went really well. And then a couple months later from that, somebody's like, hey, we've got this jazz band, do you think you'd be able to sit in? He's like, sure. It went well. A couple months later, they're like, hey, can you play lead in this jazz band? He's like, sure. There's this other jazz band he started playing with. So it just kind of started to slowly snowball for him. There's a personal aspect of when we invest time and emotional energy into something, and then it pays back those dividends of gratification. It all kind of happened over the matter of, I don't know, maybe like 6 months or so. I think we ended up working together for maybe closer to a year, because he continued obviously at that point. But got some students that I indirectly helped shepherd them up through their recitals, in school as they were preparing for that, or maybe they were doing auditions into grad school, and then they got into some grad schools they wanted to get into. There are the occasional people that, reach out, start the method, and then for whatever reason, if it doesn't take hold early on, and then they get busy and they just kind of don't stick to it, and it doesn't become a lifestyle habit for them, they kind of just get busy and it kind of fizzles away.
So the last question about these kinds of journeys would then be someone who's in their prime or looking to get into their prime. Have you worked with someone on the audition circuit or in grad school, et cetera? What have you seen there?
Yeah, similar results, I think, with graduate students who are either, let's say you're getting your master's and you're looking at doctoral programs, or maybe you're a master's or doctoral student and you're starting to take auditions. Advancing, I think, is a big difference. There's a big difference between advancing and not advancing. Once you're advancing, I think that there are other qualitative aspects of the way that you play that may or may not line up with, the specific ensemble you're trying to get into. So if I work with a client who's not advancing and then they do start to advance, I think that that's a victory as far as the work that we do together, because I'm more on the periphery in terms of how they play as a musician.
It's about giving them the tool set to finally get comfortable.
Right,
Is
exactly.
that sort of what it is?
Yeah.
I hit this wall myself when I was finally made it to music school. I did a whole cognitive science degree because I didn't get into music school in the first place. And then I did a second undergrad in music. And I was doing it, 3, 4, 5 hours a day in the practice room, but I wasn't getting better. So I really resonate with what you're saying and how painful and frustrating that is for someone who wants to pour their heart and soul into it. And I was getting better in some ways, but not in the high range.
Right.
Was my issue. That's why I'm so passionate about it now. So I'm super curious what would have happened if your stuff had been around. The bright news was I got obsessed with practicing due to my cognitive science degree. And it sounds like you too are obsessed with practicing. I'm curious, when did that come online for you, that you're like, whoa, the way that I learn makes all the difference in the world?
For me, I think that there was always this low-key underlying subconscious awareness that I was not progressing at the rate that I should be progressing, in terms of how I play. But a more overt answer is that when I finished my master's in performance, I took some auditions, And the only thing that came back was a spot in a Broadway show called Blast. I had been in the show once before. I was in the original cast actually back in the day, and then I went back to school for a while. And then they were mounting up another tour, and they needed a trombonist, and they hired me, and they asked me to be a swing, which is somebody who learns multiple roles of cast members on the floor, and then I would be rotated in, or if somebody got sick or injured, I would go be the third trombonist tonight, or I'd be the euphonium soloist tonight, or whatever. So I ended up doing 8 tracks. I was doing 2 tuba tracks, 2 euphonium tracks, and then the 4 trombone tracks. So every day it was a new challenge, and it was like new parts to play, new choreography, and so I really needed to be on my game mentally just as well as physically. So I worked really, really hard to get in great shape. I was stretching every day. I was working out. I was studying constantly. I didn't have the same number of reps as those individuals who were permanently in those positions. So I needed to have the confidence to look at some note cards, study some video, and then jump right in. And I noticed that as I made a priority of eating right and stretching and exercising and really trying to take care of my body, there were all sorts of positive side effects that came from that were not just physical. There were mental side effects. I felt like I was getting smarter. I felt like I was retaining more. I felt like I was thinking better under pressure. And so that also started a level of fascination. So I ended up going back to school for another master's, this time in conducting. And I just basically sent an email to every science professor at the university I was at, just saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'd love to learn some more. And there was a kinesiology professor who got back to me, and her name is Mary Virginia Wilmerding at the University of New Mexico. She reached back and she said, yeah, I'm a former dancer turned exercise scientist. Why don't you come in and we'll talk? And I did. And she said, yeah, you're talking about kinesiology. And I said, what's that? And she said, it's the study of human movement. And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. And, over the next 20 years or whatever, I've just developed a real appreciation for, in order for us to do our thing, we have to move our body. And so there's all sorts of fields of scientific research that study how people learn how to move and how people learn how to control those movements better. And so it just kind of snowballed from there.
What makes you world class at practicing now?
I think if you have an unlimited amount of time, you may eventually stumble onto exactly what you need to stumble onto and get better at those things and get the job done. But there's something to be said for knowing you only have 90 minutes a day. You only have an hour today. You only have 2 hours today. And being able to pinpoint exactly what you need to do and being able to get it done in a matter of just a couple of minutes because you have charted and graphed and analyzed everything about the way that you make sound and all of your habits so that you can quickly get to those answers. I think that makes somebody a more effective practicer. That has become a passion of mine over the years. And so I would say that the way that my practice time is divvied up and structured and planned, I would say it's mastery level at this point. I can get better, but I think that I'm probably in the top whatever percentage of people in terms of how they're spending their time.
Because it's like the amount of progress versus the time input on the thing.
And in some ways, it's because I don't have as much time. I wear a lot of hats, but I'm also older. I'm still trying to do the things that 23-year-olds are doing right now that are in conservatories, but I don't have that kind of time, both on the daily schedule and I'm 46. So I don't have another 20 years to go down the wrong path. If I really want to play the way that I want to play, I need to make sure that I'm aiming the boat in the right direction now.
So let's say something like articulation. You want to get faster articulation. How would you approach making progress on that? It's not just about trying to raise the BPM by 5% every 6 days, is it?
No, I think there is something to be said for the pragmatic, slow raising of the tempo. I mean, we're talking about a physical mechanism, and the tongue, which is at least part of the equation no matter who you're talking to. People have different ways that they think about it. Some people think about it more as a breath aspiration, and some people think about it more as the tongue actually releases because the air builds up behind. But wherever you are on it, the tongue has to do a thing. And being able to move the tongue more quickly is, I think, part of the recipe. So if that's part of the recipe, then there is an aspect of moving the metronome up click by click. But one of the ways that I do it, for example, is I'll imagine a measure of 16th notes. If you play one beat of 16th notes and then 3 beats of rest, I call that 25%. If
Okay.
you play 2 beats of 16th notes and 2 beats of rest, I call that 50%. And then if you play 3 beats of 16th notes and 1 beat of rest, I call that 75%. I don't do four because then there's no place to breathe, right? So if I play da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, I'm going to get certain tempo metrics for every note on the range of my instrument. If let's say I do
Yeah.
that for 30 seconds, how
Yep.
fast can I do that on a low B flat? How fast can I do that on a high F? I'm going to get metrics. If I go back and I do it at 50%, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, I'm going to
Yep.
get different metrics. If I do it
Yep.
at 75%, I'm going to get different metrics. So one of the things that
Yep.
I like to do is chart out all three, and then I start to analyze the slopes between the three. So for example, if the 25 and the 50 all kind of track up and track down at the same spots in my range, of course, the extreme parts of our range, we're not going to have as much control. But if the drop off on the 75% is significantly greater than the drop offs of the 25 and 50%, that might indicate an endurance issue with my tonguing in a certain part of my range. And that's going to inform me to then practice certain things in certain ways in that part of my range, because I realize that that's like an emergent issue that comes from the data. When I work with clients, I think it's even better for them because they don't have to think about the data. I crunch their numbers, and then
That's
I
nice.
just say, go do this. Like, here's your recipe, just go do that. And they say, okay. And then they just play that thing. So they don't have to kind of get in their own head about it,
That's
because we
brilliant.
talk about paralysis by analysis all the time.
Yeah.
But at some point, somebody needs to do the analysis. Arnold
Yes.
Jacobs used to talk about a car is a complicated system of controls, but we just use the controls and we don't have to think about what the transmission does. But you have to take the car to a mechanic when there's a problem, and the mechanic needs to know how the transmission works.
That's right.
So my role in a lot of ways is I'm that mechanic who does all the number crunching and knows how the transmission works. And then I can present to you just a basic workout. So for myself, I find that I have to wear both hats. Sometimes I'm just the practicer, and then sometimes I go and I crunch the numbers.
So that makes a ton of sense. I've also always, that's why I developed my practice app, Modacity, which I'd like you to look at, which is like you can't think about how you're going to allocate your practice time while also practicing. Like
Right.
I like to plan my practice and then execute on my practice so I can be in one mode or the other.
Yeah.
I'm curious now. So what are the data that you track for yourself?
Well, sorry for the interruption, but if you are a horn player and you struggle with high range, confidence, accuracy, consistency, or endurance, this is of interest to you. I am still running my program High Range Magic that has offered profound transformation to folks that want to unlock the high range and all of its benefits. There is a masterclass linked below that you can watch for free, 100% free, 3 Secrets of High Playing. After you watch the masterclass, you'll have an option to book a no-cost one-on-one consult with me if you're interested in finding out more about the program. That's all for now. Back to the episode.
So I track a lot of tempo. I track a lot of range. I track a lot of. This is a tough one to answer. Let's see. So
You have a spreadsheet?
I have, yes. To say I have a spreadsheet, I don't think does it justice. Yeah, I have, sheets upon sheets and integrated numbers. So in terms of my technique, I split it into 4 sections. I've got stability, agility, clarity, and fluency. Stability is just my ability to play stable tones, play over the range of the instrument, right? Agility is my ability to move in between those notes, whether it's lip slurs or flexibility or just angular intervals, that kind of stuff. Clarity is the starting of sounds, the connecting of sounds, the stopping of sounds, right? So we're talking about attacks and releases, maybe legato articulation. And then fluency is how well do I understand the patterns that the music is typically written in. So much like if you're fluent in a language, you understand
Okay.
grammar and syntax and sentence structure.
So
and
like
you
my blues scale for playing blues.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
if I understand like what a dominant 7th arpeggio looks like on the page, or, oh, that's a 7D 7-5, and I know my diminished arpeggios, I can just whip through that, Arthur Prior cadenza, and it's no big deal. Reading in different key signatures is an aspect of fluency. So fluency is something I work on regularly. I don't track it as much. I just constantly try to, make things a little more challenging so that, the concept of progressive overload becomes important, where you just
Do you periodize your fluency practice in any particular way?
I guess.
Yeah.
So one of the so with Instagram, The 100-day practice challenge is kind of like a fad that people do. I'm on day like 2,600 something. Like I just don't take days off. Yeah, I'm crushing it for the 100-day practice challenge. But I got to the point where, because I would watch all these people, they would do like a 100-day practice challenge, and then on like day 8 they'd say, oh, I was tired today and I wasn't feel like practicing, so I went for a walk, and that's my practice today. And then on day 9 I'm thinking, no, that you're now on day 1. You didn't practice on day 8. You got better as a human being and you probably grew as a musician, but the concept of going 100 days on something, I think, like if you don't do that 100 days, like you're defeating the purpose of the 100-day practice challenge. You're doing something else. And that something else is important, but it's not the same thing. So in my journey, every 100 days, I do a new thing. So this 100 days, I happen to be on tonic, dominant 7, tonic arpeggiations. So I have on my Excel spreadsheet, I've got 100 different patterns, different ways that I go up and down the notes. And then I play these different patterns, through all the keys. And every day I, practice it for a couple minutes and then make a little video and post it and move on with my life. I guess there is some periodicity with it where every 100 days I kind of have a new focus. It might be diminished, it might be chromatic, it might be, different aspects of it.
I was thinking more of something that includes revisiting of the material, for example, putting it into spaced repetition once you master it, or the way that when you're going to the gym, you periodize, like, okay, chest day, leg day, shoulders, it's like tonic dominance on Mondays and minor pentatonics on Wednesdays and whole tone scales on Fridays. And that, to me, that would be more of like...
I guess I could, but what I've found is if I have one component in my sights, and I do that, and I focus on that for the 100 days.
Yeah.
All of the other components, I tend to hit with all of my students. So on Tuesday, I might have a student that's going through whole tones. We just play whole tones together. Another day I might have a student where we're just doing stacked perfect fifths intervals to work on a little bit more of a range expansion thing. I'll play with them, and I enjoy the aspect of not only demonstrating for my students, but also holding myself accountable to just be able to drop, at the drop of a hat, be able to play whatever. And there are times where my students enjoy that low-key challenge of maybe being able to show up at their highest level of preparation and catching me like a little bit of a rusty point, and maybe being able to kind of like best the teacher. And so I'm totally comfortable with that fun little aspect of the game where sometimes my students sound better than me on something. And so we tend to play pretty regularly in all sorts of technical components together. And since I have students that are really covering a very wide range of ability and experience levels, I tend to hit all of my food groups, as I play with them. So that means that when I come to my own practice room, I can focus on like the hard one that I'm really digging into right now.
Maybe we can even do a little practical application for folks to hear me poop all over a lick.
This might be the moment that like viewer discretion is advised, because it seems to be a very triggering topic for some.
Yeah, exactly. All right, trigger alert. We're going to talk about some controversial opinions about fast practice. From what I've seen, I 100% agree with you. No, from what I've seen, I trend towards agreeing on some things with you, and have some questions. Yeah. So tell me, what's your philosophy on fast practice, and what's the spiel?
Sure. So if you're developing a physical mechanism of your playing, so embouchure, articulation, things like that, you're going to have to slow things down. And we all have to do work very slowly. And I think from a global standpoint, slow things down, think slowly, work slowly through things. This is all very good information, right? Slow always wins whenever you're doing that large glacial kind of, practicing. When you're learning repertoire, and I say specifically for repertoire, when you're learning repertoire, if you start learning that repertoire slowly, and then you slowly speed up the metronome, then your first experiences with those patterns and with those passages is in a slower capacity. And that means it's going to get coordinated in a certain way, both physically in your body, but also neurologically in terms of the pathways that are created in your brain. If you know that the end game goal is you're going to have to play this thing quickly, like whether it's an excerpt that needs to be played at a certain tempo, or there's a solo section and it's 16th notes and it's allegro. If it is a fast thing and you start slowly, I think you're taking the long way around. I don't think you're doing damage. I just think you're taking a longer approach, because the way that the body and the brain work when we have to coordinate multiple movements is if we have more time in between events, that's more opportunity for the brain to consciously think and react to things that it notices. That's more time for you to do like little shifty weirdness with your embouchure or add breathing in places that you're not going to be able to breathe when you're going faster. And that might shift exactly where things are situated on your face. So when we slow things down, I think we more likely invite all these inefficiencies into the process of our body just developing the habits to play at quicker tempos. So I'm not suggesting that we need to do everything fast, but I am suggesting that when we're learning a piece for the first time, we should, as much as possible, keep it in the context of at the tempo that it needs to be played. And that is typically faster than what is comfortable for us because we can't read all the notes, so we can't think that quickly, and we can't, move that quickly.
So then it's the 25% or the 10%, or you chunk it in different chunks and add the chunks together.
It might be 2 notes. It might be 1 beat. It might be, just little tiny bite-sized pieces. But it's better, I think, to keep tempo intact. There's all sorts of speculation, and this may be a big rabbit hole, but in the cognitive science world, and you may be somewhat familiar with this, once upon a time there was Sir Isaac Newton who basically said that atoms bounce and forth back and forth deterministically, and kind of in some ways removed that arrow of time that Aristotle's like formal cause and final cause kind of put in place in terms of how human beings think, or how they thought about how we think. So when time was removed from the equation, all of a sudden you started seeing the scientific community basically discard it as a necessary constraint when running experiments on things. And so there was this slow kind of erosion of the importance of keeping time as a constraint for human movement, human thought, that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why pedagogically we got into a world where, you can slow it down and it doesn't matter. But what I would argue is if there's a piece that you need to play at 144 beats a minute and you're practicing it at 72 beats a minute, it's going to sound better because you have time to massage every single note. But the way that your body is picking up on how to play that is significantly different than it would be if you were at 144 beats a minute. And it doesn't scale up in a linear fashion. There's a point where your body's going to have to completely redevelop the way that it does the thing.
And I guess your caveat, so I'm thinking of this lick in the Beethoven sonata that's a big jump in the horn. It's like, da 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 ba beep ba 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 ba. Like, wow, I was saying it out, but let's see, first notes of the day, but
yeah, go for it.
Like that. And for me, I practiced that slow so many times, never got it up to tempo, but also trying to practice bim bom, like an octave and a fifth jump fast, never worked either. Mm-hmm. And so I think maybe there's a thing about, because that there is a physiological mastery that needs to happen, perhaps built up through a slow pathway. How would you approach something like that?
So let's say for 13th. You to like leap a 12th, there's some shifting things that happen. So I would suggest that is a stability limitation that then causes an agility limitation.
Ooh.
Yeah. If the way that your face works to play the high note and the way that your face works to play the low note are the same or are close to one another, you're going to be able to toggle back and forth relatively quickly, right? Your agility will be fine. But if the way that your face works to play the high note and the way that your face works to play the low note are different, well, now there's this big shift that you kind of have to do, and so it's tough to do it quickly. So you could start slowly and work up to tempo, in which case you're taking an agility approach, right? Where you're trying, well, I guess that would be a stability approach where you're just trying to get the two to be, kind of more stable. And then over time, the way you play this note and the way you play that note might become more similar so that the difference between the two is such that you can kind of do the leaps. And then if you do it at a faster context, I guess maybe that's the agility approach where you're just trying to make it less dirty, right? So one way is to go slow and clean and make it faster, and the other way is to go fast and then slowly make it cleaner. And in this context, we're talking about a physical mechanism. So I think it is reasonable to go slow, but I also think because it's repertoire, you want to do at least some of your practicing from that faster context, 1 or 2 notes at a time. So I would probably double track it. I would probably go in both directions, just because of the leap. Now, if it was all within a fifth and it's all really notey and you're just struggling to like coordinate and like play the notes fast enough, I don't
Yeah.
think there's not the same physical mechanism challenge. There's not the
Right.
same stability issue. I would not slow that down, and I would advocate, just keeping it a goal tempo. Let's forward chain it. Let's backward micro chain it. Let's goal macro chain it. Let's do all these different versions.
Whoa. You
Yeah.
just said, whoa, what were the three things you just said?
Lots of big words. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Nope, just say, it's okay. Just say them. I'm up to it.
Okay, so when I wrote my doctoral paper, I was advised that I needed words to describe what I was talking about.
Yeah. You say
And-
macro chain, micro
Yeah,
chain.
my wife was like, "You're going to be a doctor. Invent some words." And so I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay." So chaining is the concept of chaining things together, and that's not too hard. But micro chaining and macro chaining, I say that micro chaining is where we take like one note, then two notes, then three notes, then
Okay.
four notes. Macro
Okay.
chaining might be we take this beat of 16th notes, and then this beat of 16th notes.
Okay.
And then
That's
this
what I call chunking.
so micro
Yeah.
versus macro, and then forward
Okay.
versus backward. That might
Uh-huh.
be, so forward chaining would be you take the first note, you add the second note, you add the third
Uh-huh.
note. Backward
Uh-huh.
chaining might be you start with the last note, you add the previous note, you add two previous notes, you add
Yes.
three previous notes.
Do you have science on the effectiveness of forward versus backward chaining?
I don't. If I were to look for some, I would probably look toward like Alexander Graham Bell. A lot of the research there had to deal with short-term working memory, 5 plus or minus 2 in terms of working
Yeah.
memory. And that's where
Yeah.
they came up with this idea of chunking and chaining from a cognitive perspective, because phone numbers used to be 3 digits, 4 digits, because you can remember that a little more easily.
Right.
And now nobody needs to know phone numbers at all, so it's moot. But in terms of motor learning, Bob Duke there might be some meat on the bone from Bob Duke's work down at the Texas Center for Music Learning. But there's not a ton. There's not a ton. So a lot of it's just applying those theoretical principles into practice and then anecdotally seeing that it just makes a ton of sense. So someday I hope to produce some, research
That'd be
for
cool.
people. But
Because I'm a huge fan of backward chaining. Huge fan. I love the way it feels. It's totally different effect. It feels different when you do that versus
Yeah.
forward chaining. And I imagine, again, like you said, hitting it from both directions is probably the way.
Well, and then I also do a third one. I do goal chaining. So goal micro chaining might be, let's say there's 9 notes and the 5th and the 6th note is real gnarly. So
Yeah.
start with the 5th and 6th note, then add one before, one after, one before, one after, one before, one after. Monday you could forward chain, Tuesday you could backward chain, Wednesday you could goal chain, Thursday you could macro chain. And next thing you know, by constantly diversifying the way in which you're doing it, but all of those methods are keeping the tempo intact in terms of this event to that event. So you could go several days using new methods each day. And so I think that there's a ton of room for creativity and a vibrant, diversity that can be, in our practicing while maintaining the tempo. And if you do all that stuff and you still aren't getting it, okay, fine, you may have to slow it down a little bit, but at least most of the work that you're doing is, trying to, pay respects to keeping the tempo intact, because I think ultimately that'll be more effective.
Okay, so let's test this out.
Okay.
I've got a lick. That I just started learning 2 days ago.
Okay, perfect.
And I've been thinking about this, and I think this is gonna be our special segment.
All right, so this is where we did the mini episode where Jason coached me on a passage that I was trying to prepare. Super cool. I've been using his techniques. I actually watched the mini episode myself a couple times. Highly benefited, highly recommend it. Whatever platform you're on right now, you can just go to the show notes and you'll find the link there. Or you can go to highrangemagic.com/Jason. It's highrangemagic.com/Jason and find the mini episode there.
And there's a couple burning questions that I have for you. So first of all, stringing popcorn.
So Christmas Eve, I was usually a Christmas Eve thing, or not a Christmas Eve, but when we would put up the Christmas tree, my mom would like bake a bunch of popcorn, and because there's 2 sets of twins in my family, and so she would give us all a needle and thread, and we would
Yeah.
start stringing popcorn. And there would be $1 put into the pot for every member of the family, and whoever strung the most popcorn would win the pot. It was like $6, for everybody. And for whatever reason, I just did not get up from the chair. I just strang popcorn
Don't
over
lie, you macro chained and micro chained
just
for weeks in
over
advance.
and over. No, over and over. And it got to the point where I didn't even realize. I didn't realize other people were like getting up and going to the bathroom and grabbing a drink and doing whatever because I was just stringing popcorn. I was like Forrest Gump with the ping pong balls, just doing it, right? So I won it like 4 years in a row. And by the year 5, the other 3 siblings were stringing their popcorn together and I was still beating them. Apparently I'm some savant with the stringing of the popcorn, but I think the interesting takeaway for me is that I tend to be somebody who just puts their head down and goes.
Yeah.
Much more of the OCD side as opposed to the ADHD side, in terms of my
Interesting.
personality. But I
Yeah.
think that's also one of the reasons why me building in variety in my practicing, like the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet is telling me to do this other thing today. So I'm going to do this other thing today because otherwise I'll just do the same thing every day.
Wow.
And so for
That's
me,
fascinating.
yeah. And some
Because
people
I'm on the
really
other
feel
side.
yeah.
I'm on the ADHD side, and like, it's so hard to do the same thing every day. And I'm curious what the optimal practice looks like for someone who trends on the ADHD side of things.
I think if you have a structured plan, it puts you into the middle. It puts you kind of regressing toward the middle, which is, I think, where we want to be for the most part. There are moments where we need to drill down on things, and then there are moments where we need to just explore and kind of move through a bunch, get the sausage moving through the grinder, as one of my teachers used to say. So if your psychological tendency is to be like pretty far to one side, having a structure that has the variety will kind of get you more toward the middle. If you're somebody who has too much variety and you just need to hunker down with like a plan, having a plan written out and having a plan kind of already structured and laid out for you, I think can kind of get you more toward the middle. So I think for most people that find themselves on an extreme, it's about getting to the middle.
The other curiosity I have to investigate is I asked you while we were preparing, I asked you what's been a game changer or an unconventional practice you have. You said you float in a vortex on stage. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I totally can. All right. So as a bass trombonist, I count a lot of rests, especially since most of my playing is in regional orchestras that aren't doing Mahler symphonies most of the time. So most of the stuff I do, there's a lot of downtime, tacit movements, lots of rest. So what I've noticed, first off, there's research in ergonomics that suggests a 10 to 15 degree negative seat pan angle is optimal for lumbar lordosis, right? For a curved spine. So I have chair blocks under the legs of my chair so that my seat is angled a little up. So I tend to sit, with good posture. What I've noticed is that if you're sitting in a chair and you imagine that you just start leaning to the left, there's a point where your gravity starts to pull your body to the left, and you can feel that, right? So if you just kind of lean over to the left, there's a point where you realize your body's having to engage to keep you from falling, right? And then if you go to the right, there's a point, same thing. The body's going to start engaging to keep you from falling to the right. If you go forward, there's a point where the back of your body has to engage to keep you from just falling forward. And then if you go backward, there's a point where the front part of your body is going to engage to keep you from falling backwards. These are not all the same point. In a way, they're kind of like 4 different points, right?
Yeah.
So then what I started realizing is that if I allow my body to float in between those 4 points without touching those 4 points, my body would start to kind of swirl a little bit, and I would develop this kind of vortex at sitting in the chair. And so what I start to do is I just allow my body to kind of stay like in that space, in that vortex, and float around. And then I notice that all of a sudden my breathing opens up, my body calms. It's almost like I'm meditating during the 3rd movement, And then and sometimes I'll even have my eyes closed like the whole time. So like the first 3 movements of Beethoven 5, I'm just literally like this.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden I'll hear the part, before I come to play, and I'll be like, all right, pick up my horn. And it's just the most relaxed, meditative, like just right there. It's a way to pass the time. Sometimes that's helpful. It's a way to center down. Sometimes that's helpful. It's a way to calm down if I'm getting a little anxious about the entrance. That's helpful. There's just so many ways that, and it opens up my breathing, which is going to help my playing, my resonance. It's going to help my, my phrasing, all sorts of things. So I just started doing that. I was in grad school, and we had a real micromanager of a rehearser as a conductor, and there were like 3 hour, rehearsals that I didn't play a note. And so
Wow.
I just needed to come up with something. And I just kind of started floating around. I was like, oh, well, what would happen if that's too far? Oh, that's too far. That's too far. All right, well, what if I kind of stay in the middle? And I used
Yeah.
to do yoga every day. So, I mean, I kind of,
Right.
kind of tying into some of that idea.
That's so cool.
So yeah, float in the vortex. And
Float in the vortex.
I've talked to my students about it. And so sometimes if they come and watch a performance that I'm in, they'll chuckle with me afterwards, be like, yeah, I saw you floating in your vortex up there. Yeah, I was. Maybe it'll catch on.
I've got three rocket round questions for you, and then
Cool.
number one, what music or musicians are inspiring you right now?
I'm gonna go maybe non-traditional with this one. Bruce Hornsby.
Huh.
Loving Bruce Hornsby lately. He's been reinventing himself. He's getting into the dulcimer lately, and
Ooh.
I don't know. He's doing all sorts of cool stuff. I've always just had a lot of respect for him. So I would say he's
Love
one.
that.
I'm gonna tie it into a CD. I think that's not like my bucket list. Like deserted tropical island can only take one CD. The Palestrina 400 collection.
Yeah.
Phillips, yeah, the Tallis Scholars. Unbelievable purity and clarity in their tone and in their blend. And for me, I come back to that so much. Yeah, which is the way that I play. So I'd put that on the list as well.
What's a skill or topic that you know embarrassingly little about but wish you did?
Sports. I
Interesting.
would say sports. I don't know what sporting events are happening right now. Like,
Yeah.
is basketball happening right now? I don't know. I'm
Nah.
pretty sure baseball's done, but like, I don't know. I have a lot of colleagues in the brass section who seem to have their finger on the pulse of various sports teams, and I just don't know the sports ball.
When I'd play with San Francisco Symphony backstage, there'd be a TV with the game on, like right
Right.
in the musicians' foyer, right
Huddled
before we'd be
around
going
it,
on.
yeah.
People would be watching the game. What would you put on a billboard for all musicians to see?
Keep going.
Beautiful.
I would put it like that. Sometimes we overthink all sorts of aspects. Just keep going. If you're going through hell, keep going. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
if it's going
Oh,
well,
that's very-
great. Keep going.
Love that. People can find you at jasonsulliman.com. Your Instagram is at Jason Sulliman, is that right?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
And I need to just plug your Instagram. It's super interesting, inspiring. That's how I first heard of you, and I saw your fast practice videos.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I saw that and I went, "Oh yeah, this guy gets it."
My
Yes.
people.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I hope that I will get to do some of your workouts, and I'm gonna just get to backwards or goal micro chaining tomorrow.
Goal micro. Yeah.
Goal micro.
There you go.
It's pretty fascinating. Thank you for sharing all these ideas.
Sure. Yeah. I hope they help.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast. This episode is brought to you by High Range Magic, my online program that helps horn players liberate their high range as well as reach new levels of relaxation and ease throughout the full range of the horn, and also to kind of reclaim a beautiful new paradigm of relationship and mindset with the instrument. If that sounds interesting to you, head over to highrangemagic.com and you can register to watch the free masterclass I have, How to Confidently Enjoy a 4+ Octave Range Without Pain, Overthinking, or Constantly Practicing. That's over at highrangemagic.com. Thanks again.